Let's take a look at some information and charts on Litecoin for Brave New Coin. So Litecoin is a proof of work network. It is a Bitcoin fork. It will eventually have 4 times the total number of circulating coins and has a 4 times quicker block time. We can look at all that in a second here. In recent years, Litecoin has had, let's just say, fewer and fewer developments that are exciting at any given point in time. It still remains a currency. It's still in the conversation. It's still Bitcoin's cousin. It's not exactly exciting. It hasn't been, at least. It hasn't been DeFi. They really haven't been on the forefront of anything since SegWit, when that got implemented before BTC. So it's interesting to see them over recent months work on development for Mimblewimble and extension blocks. This is from lead developer David Burkett. So they are pushing the envelope as far as technology and experimentation in a good way. I don't necessarily agree with the idea of Mimblewimble, because how extension blocks work is they are kind of their own little black box sidechain that gets merged or remerged with the main chain. And there are some issues there that could arise when you potentially break consensus in the extension block. I'm not saying that that's going to happen. I'm just saying that's a possibility. It's just part of the risk there with introducing that. So I'm glad Litecoin's working on it. I'm glad Litecoin is seeming to be implementing it sooner rather than later. They go through here, they talk about some issues they found in the code and how they're changing things up, and it's still being worked on. So all that looks to be continuing development and will likely be released probably, I'd assume, by next year at some point. Now, is that going to move the needle for Litecoin? I don't really think so. Price-wise, it's cool that it's cool tech. Is it going to bring people on board? I don't really think so. If anything, it may make exchanges hesitant of listing or even delist Litecoin because of privacy stuff. We've seen that with Dash. We've seen that with Monero. I don't think it would be as drastic as delisting Litecoin, but that's always a remote possibility. Here's block times. Block times are 2.5 minutes. So again, that's 4 times quicker than BTC. For the most part, block times have stayed below 2.5 minutes, aside from a few times when hash rate has gotten pulled from the network prior to difficulty adjustments. And the hash rate difficulty has largely been in the same range over the past few years and has been continuously buoyant in recent months, thanks in part to Doge merge mining. So how this works is when you mine Litecoin, you mine Doge at the same time, and when you mine Doge, you mine Litecoin at the same time. They're both script coins using the script consensus algorithm. Doge miners are currently making 3x what Litecoin miners are making on any given day. I talked about that earlier this week in the Doge video. But had that merge mining initiative not been put forth by Charlie Lee many years ago, Doge probably wouldn't exist in its current form, because these proof of networks need hash rate to sustain the security model. So we can all thank Charlie Lee for the Dogecoin price action we had this year. Something else that Litecoin has done recently is bring aboard a game. I don't know exactly how this came about, but it's a cool DeFi dApp sort of initiative, Lightbringer. I haven't played the game myself. I'm a gamer. I haven't looked into it further, but based on what you can see with on-chain stats, very clearly people are doing something with it. So this is transaction counts on Litecoin since 2014. For the most part, transaction counts have been flat or muted, aside from 2017, 2018, when Bitcoin transactions got prohibitively expensive and people were looking for alternative chains, and that just so happened to be Litecoin at the time. And then since then, it had a baseline, but and then in September, October 2020, when that Lightbringer game was released, you started to see more and more transactions on chain, and transactions on chain are still holding at those all-time high type of levels at around 140,000 to 160,000 per day. So you can't look at these transaction profiles and say, this is so crazy bullish for price. It's a new paradigm. Things are changing for Litecoin, because it's adding more functionality to the chain. So the chain is just different than it was. That in itself could be bullish, but ultimately it hasn't really worked out like that. My point is that it's just a different chain than it was previously, because it has this functionality that it didn't previously. So you can't just look at transaction counts in a vacuum and assume that's going to be wildly bullish for price. Average transaction values essentially flat over the past few years. Not too much going on there. If we look at pending transaction counts for LTC over the past year. For the most part, LTC has just hung out around 400 or less active or unconfirmed transactions. If we look at BTC or ETH, it's a much different picture. BTC most recently is holding somewhere below 5,000 pending transactions. You can see when the network's congested, transactions spike to 200,000 plus. Fees go way up, right? We can look at ETH, see the same thing. You can see since August how transaction counts in the mempool pending have just continued to rise. Fees in the colors here have continued to rise. And that just shows you how robust the transaction counts are on ETH. You can see previously when they raised the block ceiling, basically increased the gas ceiling there and had some alleviation in price. But as you widen the lanes in the highway, that isn't a permanent fix. You eventually just get more traffic on the highway. So ETH, for example, really needs layer 2 solutions, whereas LTC, at 400 transactions pending is still fine. They're definitely upticking because of probably this Lightbringer stuff. And if we zoom way out, I think you can even see where the network changed. You can see this fundamental shift in pending transactions sitting at sub 200. And then in October 2020, all of a sudden we're sitting at above 400. It's not a big change, but it's definitely giving you another idea of the impact of this Lightbringer thing on the chain. Again, not going to move the needle, but interesting to look at. If we look at NVT, which is an inverse metric of economic utility relative to price, you want NVT falling. That says on-chain activity is picking up relative to market cap if you're bullish. NVT recently, since July, has been rising. So that's not super bullish. It's certainly at the low end of that range since 2017, but it doesn't look like a mega bull run, for example. Active addresses, much like transaction counts, sitting all-time highs. This is a new all-time high for transactions in October. Didn't really see anybody talking about that. And it wasn't necessarily felt in price, right? Like it just is what the on-chain data is showing. I think if you're looking at this and not knowing what's going on, you're thinking, yeah, this is something new to invest in that looks much more bullish than it ever has. Whereas from my perspective, it's just part of this blockchain game that doesn't necessarily add anything to the Litecoin price. Maybe as a skeptic, that's an incorrect viewpoint, but price-wise, it hasn't really done anything yet. If you look at MVRV versus price, MVRV in the fill here, another one of these metrics for market cap versus on-chain activity. For most coins, this tops out at around a 2x multiple. For DeFi, this metric's largely useless, but for currencies like LTC, historically on backtesting, MVRV has panned out rather well at telling you when we're getting closer to the top than the bottom, or when we're closer to the bottom than the top. If we look at MVRV since July 2017, and where the highs in price have lined up with highs in MVRV, they've all lined up rather well. And this is in hindsight, obviously, so you'd have to watch this like a hawk actively if you're trading this stuff in a broad bull market. But once we get to that 2x multiple, we get very close to the top after 2017. Even in 2019, we hit that 1.6x multiple. It's telling you be careful. And more recently, we broke 2 again at 2.4. We broke 2 for a while, right? So it's not always like the exact top, but it's definitely something to watch to get a gauge for how much speculation is there on the chain relative to on-chain activity. And this was even after the Lightbringer game, right? So it kind of normalizes on-chain activity versus price versus just looking at transaction counts and active addresses. There's also a Lightning Network component for Litecoin, but that really hasn't taken off. It really, it's got 143 Litecoin network capacity currently, probably just a couple of people, so not much going on that front. Google Trends worldwide past 5 years for the word Litecoin, also mostly flat. Some upticks here with upticks in price. But if you're truly bullish, you want to see a week over week increase in Google Trends because it represents retail coming in, even legacy people coming in, articles being written about Litecoin, just basic grassroots stuff. Are people getting involved in any way with Litecoin? So it is ticking up. It is approaching multi-week highs, or it did anyway. But it's definitely not even to late 2020, early 2021 levels. And then as we transition into the technicals, I just want to talk about the Grayscale stuff. So there is a trust, a Litecoin trust there for Grayscale, 358 million. one of their smaller-ish trusts, certainly smaller than ETH Classic, ETH, Bitcoin. I guess it's maybe the 5th largest trust they have. And it currently holds a 10% premium over spot, unlike most of their products, which hold a discount to spot. And this is probably because there's a lockup component, a vesting component. For example, when you buy into this, you have to hold it for 6 to 12 months, whatever the prospectus or whatever the contract says when you buy those pink sheets. So that's usually why there's a premium on stuff like this. Flipping gears to technicals, this is the 5200 EMA VPVR yearly pivots RSI volume at the bottom here. So prior to this spike up over the past 2 weeks, I guess, there was a bullish 5200 cross. There was a W-type bottom. There was a potential ascending triangle. All that was here. Did I act on it? Would I have acted on this? No. I talked about this on Monday in the Setup Monday video that I'd expect LTC to Eiffel Tower back down sub 220 because historically nobody wants to hold on to this. It is a hot potato. It goes up quicker than it goes down. It goes down with ferocity when it does go down, right? It's just all over the place. The volatility is incredibly high. But trend-wise, it still looks okay. It's rather ugly that it printed what it printed, down 30% in 4 days. But trend-wise, it still looks okay. It's still above the R2, still above the 200. Not a ton of volume up here. I mean, does it look like anything I want to touch anytime soon? No, it doesn't. It doesn't look exciting enough to me. And if we look on the cloud, we had the bullish Kumo breakout. You even had this low time frame, sort of inverted head and shoulders type fractal. And it exploded and then quickly retraced to the Kijun and then some. So it's sort of in no man's land from a cloud perspective. You don't want to be above the cloud, below the Kijun. You want to be wicking into the Kijun and bouncing, kind of like it did in 2021 early, where you'd have these overbought conditions that pull back to the mean, overbought, pull back, overbought, pull back, overbought, pull back. Maybe you could say it's analogous with this, and what you're hoping for going forward is a definitive low candle print or a definitive chart pattern, something to say, okay, even though it didn't bounce on the Kijun, everything's still fine, trend is still okay. Sort of like it did here. This is a spinning top candlestick as it's referred. You might even be looking for a dragonfly. This one here. Yeah, I know this is in hindsight. I get it. This is a tweezer bottom. But these are the type of structures you're looking for over the next 3 days. It takes 3 days to wait for a trade. That's fine by me. You're down 30% in 4 days. I think waiting another 3 days is appropriate here if you're looking to jump back in. But again, it is above the cloud. It is above the 200. It's not over for Litecoin or anything like that. It just doesn't look super clean as a bounce candidate. Switching gears to LTC BTC, it's really been a chronic underperformer of BTC ever since 2017. It's interesting to look back at this and see this head and shoulders repetitive price action at the top here. Not only just these micro head and shoulders fractals, but this macro triple top that it has never recovered from. It just has continuously been a grueling grind, lower, 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 lower. So it's hard for me to want to be the hero here and step in personally and say, yeah, this is the bottom. There just isn't a history of an established bullish trend. It has histories of spiking up and then ranging, but it's never had a multi-year strength against BTC. I guess you could say multi-week is as good as it's gotten. But just looking at this is just a giant avoid for me. And then LTC against ETH, it's been good night ever since 2019. You had this death cross here on the 50 to 200. That's just pretty much been it, right? Like it's retested the 200 a couple times. And you might think Litecoin is the next best thing fundamentally against ETH. But the truth is most people are using ETH. More people are using ETH than Litecoin. More dApps and services are on ETH. And you can see that in this chart. Regardless of fees and pending transactions and the potential of Mimblewimble and the new tech coming to Litecoin, I just don't see that moving the needle against BTC or ETH in the near term. In order to be bullish on both of these, you would need a bullish 5200 cross, bare minimum, especially when you've seen a multi-year downtrend like this. To see an actual cross, which could happen over the next couple of months, not saying it's impossible, but to see an actual bull cross here would be the first signs of life in years that you could say, all right, finally LTC's catching up to ETH a little bit. Then you'd have to have some evidence for a rotation trade there. But as it sits currently, that's just not there. You know, there's no bull divs here anymore. There's nothing that I can see besides breaking the 50 MA for the first time since early 2021 that you could say, yeah, this is a good reason to go long here. Lastly, let me just mention the ETH BTC fund and DeFi portfolio I trade for Technique Capital on Enzyme.finance, a non-custodial portfolio management tool where you can send ETH or USDC or just watch what I'm doing. You can see everything, including AUM performance, allocation, all the vaults I'm in here on Yearn, Comp, and Aave, as well as the trades and the trade tab down below. That's all I have for this one. Like, dislike, comment, share, subscribe, and happy trading.